But my mate Dave, this is when we were both about 16, 17 at school, was also working on a programming project in Fortran to play noughts and crosses. And he'd never got his program to stop cheating, but it did at one point shut down two nuclear reactors and evacuate an atomic energy research plant.
Welcome to another episode of ArrayCast. I'm your host, Connor, and today with us we have our four main panelists. We're going to go around and do brief introductions before we get into our topic for today. So we'll start with Bob, then go to Stephen, then to Adam, and then to Marshall.
I'm Bob Terrio, and I am part of the JWiki group and doing lots of stuff with J, and I am enthusiastic about J.
I'm Stephen Taylor. I'm an APL and Q enthusiast and occasionally get enthusiastic about J.
I'm Adam Bolzewski. I'm kind of enthusiastic about all array languages, and I think I'm finally beginning to get how some of that K stuff works as well.
I'm Marshall Lockbaum. I've worked with J and Dialog in the past. Now I'm known for BQN, which is the language I made.
And as mentioned before, my name's Connor. I am a programming language polyglot, but a massive fan of all the array languages, including the more fringe array languages that have been mentioned before, such as Cap and Jelly, which I will be adding to the list of languages that we discuss more on this podcast, but not today. Today we have a topic that we're going to get to still in a second because we've got a couple announcements. First, we'll go to Adam, and then we'll go to Bob.
Okay, so we just had the Dialog 23 user meeting last week, which was a blast. For me, it was the first live user meeting I attended since 2019. And if you missed it, which obviously most people did, then you have a little bit of chance to catch up on what was said there by looking at the materials that were presented there. So the videos aren't up yet. They will be processed and released little by little this side of the new year. However, most people's slides are available already, and even some of the materials that were used in like workshops are available as well. So if you're really curious, go and have a look there, and more things will be coming up. It was really amazing to be there. Lots of interesting things presented, and I think maybe the most important and most giving takeaway from there was that there were a lot of people from doing different kinds of work using APL. It wasn't all just financial industry people doing things, and there were people doing physics modeling, various people doing it. There were people who were doing sales systems and graphics and things. And also, I think we're slowly getting towards that point where people are seeing that it's good to grow the community. So we even had somebody from SimCorp, who does financial software, presenting a little project that he has made that is a free open source thing in APL that he wants to contribute to the community. Something about running APL underneath C#. But I think that's kind of a turning point where these commercial customers of APL want to help grow the community.
Yeah, that's awesome. We will definitely, if it's open source, leave a link in the description for folks that want to check that out and maybe be inspired and contribute their own open source array language project. And I think with that, we'll hop over to Bob for our last announcement.
And particularly appropriate that you talked about putting a link in, because my announcement is about Apple Podcasts apparently want to clip our show notes after about 3 notes. Which extremely limits the number of show notes that you can get access to through Apple Podcasts. I don't subscribe through Apple Podcasts. I use Overcast. I get all the show notes. That's no problem. If you go to our website, which is really my announcement, if you're having trouble getting to our show notes, go to our website. It's got all the show notes on it. So they're all accessible easily. But if you're actually doing it through your podcatcher, and your podcatcher isn't catching them, let me know. We're working with Apple to see if we can get that straightened out, but they're a big company. I'm not sure how long it'll take. In the meantime, if you're not seeing all the notes, you can see it at the website, which is arraycast.com. And that's my announcement. Sorry about that, but that's my announcement.
Adam?
Can't we just have the first link in our show notes be to the full list on our own website?
Yeah, I was literally going to say the same thing. Someone once asked for that, and I kind of thought it was odd because I use the exact same markdown file for my website as I do for the show notes. So that means on the website, the first link is a recursive link to itself. But on the podcast app, if people, don't have troubles or whatever, and some people just don't like dealing with the podcast interface. And if you go to a website in Chrome or whatever, it's just a better experience. But yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Maybe we can start doing that.
No, that's a good solution. I'll happily, because I do the same thing. The show notes are copied over to my podcast accumulator, and so I have to make that copy and do some adjustments, and I can easily put in one link. That's easy to do, and it'll take you back to the website.
Yep. Problem solved. I mean, and hopefully full problem solved if Apple can sort their stuff out, but unsurprising that they're doing something special that's causing their customers problems. Anyways, getting to our topic for today. I mean, I will announce the topic and then we're going to take a tangent. The topic for today is game programming in the array languages. And I think this is kind of going to be a precursor to potentially one or multiple episodes where we bring on guests from the community that have been doing some work in this space to TBA. I think actually we got messages from both of the people that I had in mind. I don't, what their names are Brian and David, right?
David Switzer and Brian,
whose last name no one's going to remember.
No, yeah, no. I can almost see it, but no, I won't even try and pronounce. It's not that hard to pronounce. It's just I'm not familiar enough with the name to say it and not do it.
Yeah, I think his GitHub username is like Brian ED. And yeah, so David was unnamed but mentioned when I think I said in the last episode that he had some YouTube videos showing, programming some games in BQN. And then Brian is the individual that has worked on the library Raylib, or at least the bindings to BQN, which we will get to in a second. And I think probably Marshall, we'll throw it to you when we start that discussion, because you probably have, at least in the BQN space, the most familiar with those libraries. However, before we get to that, let's look at the time. The time is noted, and we're going to time box this to 5 minutes. I promise, though, this won't become tacit number 6, but we're going to make it tacit number 5.1 or 01, because I do have a follow-up question that I need answered, and I can't wait. I would say 2 weeks, but we already have the next episode guest lined up, and I think we might even tentatively have the 2 lined up. So that means 6 weeks. I can't wait 6 weeks, folks. And I could just ask Marshall, but I want the listener to hear the answer too. So I can't remember. I think, Adam, you mentioned that when we were having the discussion about trains last time, that it's not a given that you would have the 2-train, 3-train model and have 3 trains be monadic and dyadic forks. And you mentioned that you could just use 2 glyphs to represent your 3 trains. And I think you mentioned that this is what CAP does explicitly. And then I went and took a look at CAP. Super interesting language. I hope we can get Elias, the author of CAP. Note that CAP, I love the fact there's a tangent within a tangent. CAP is written in Kotlin. So we've got most of the array languages, like up until a certain point, including BQN, were written in C. Then we've got Wewa written in...
Well, not for open source stuff. If you look at, we've got a nice wiki page on the list of open source languages, and it's kind of incredible how many different languages are represented there, because there's like Go, and I think there's one in D, and there's Java, of course. I mean, there's all sorts of source languages that have been used. For the big stuff, it's mostly C, yeah.
That's true. But it was just interesting that we had Kai on to talk about Wewa, and that's in Rust. We're hoping to get Elias on to talk about CAP, and that's written in Kotlin. Anyways, tangent over within a tangent, back to the original tangent. And so my question is, I guess, mostly for Marshall, because when I started taking a look at this, I did start to build out a couple of my classic problems that I like to solve, max consecutive ones, Cadenes, etc., which make use of forks. And sure enough, you put basically like a double less than, double greater than for the 2 symbols in between, which is very nice because they are symmetric. And I think if you roll the tape back, I even said, I'd actually have to think about this. If you had something symmetric like the before and after in BQN, maybe it would be nice. And the final thing to note about CAP before I ask my question is that CAP does not have 3 trains. They only have 2 trains. And you spell the fork, monadic and dyadic, with these 2 glyphs, which means that You don't get this, even odd when you have a 3 train, it's a fork, then a 4 train, it's a 2 train plus the 3 train that forms a unary. You just get basically 2 train, 2 train, 2 train, 2 train, which means you can spell a sequence of unary function compositions nicely. And I haven't played around with CAP enough to know if I like that model better. But my question to Marshall is, my guess is that although CAP came out in 2020, which is the same time when BQN came out. So maybe...
Yeah, well, and it added forks much later. Or it added that syntax. I think CAP was actually using the APL style forks with just putting functions, a train of functions. And it added those in maybe 21 or 22, which was after I'd stopped really making pretty much any changes to BQN.
Interesting. So my question is, did you know about CAP's no 3 train model with the 2 glyphs for forks? Or even if you didn't know about it, had you considered it? And if yes, why do you prefer the 3 train model? If no, now that you know about it, having decided that, do you think it's which one do you think is better? Or do you definitively know?
Well, I can't really say. I mean, I know the 3 trains written with just bases is definitely what I'm used to. I mean, it's a question of, do you add, one of these requires more syntax, right? If you're adding special symbols for trains, you have to add more syntax. So it's a question of, whether, and of course there's also K, which just has the 2 trains and doesn't add this syntax. So it's, do you want to, how much effort do you want to put into supporting trains is one question. I haven't really spent a lot of time in any language that doesn't do the APL style trains. So I can't say much about, which is actually nicer to program in. I can only say that the 3 trains and so on are what I'm used to. And the thing to understand about BQN is that it's not my attempt to make the best possible language. It is my attempt to make a solid version of APL that I know is good. So when possible, I was sticking with APL. If I didn't know what the consequences of some decision were, I just wouldn't do it. So there were some things that I was very sure about, and other people may disagree, and they may still to this day think that I'm wrong about. But I made changes that I was sure would work, and I didn't make changes that would be speculative. I've left that to other dialects. So I think it's good that people are working with this and trying other ways to do things. But BQN is fundamentally supposed to stick with APL tradition, and that's the tradition that was explored at the time.
That is very interesting. And I also, like I said, I have not played around with it enough. I mean, I've only played around with it for the last 24 hours. And I think one of the consequences is that the AGH forks, which we need to find a better name for, aka the forks where the left hind is an array. Typically it's a scalar. I don't think those are... You can't just plop those in to the no 3 train CAP model. Although the nice thing is that you get reverse compose, which is proposed for, or has been talked about for Dialog APL, which is the analog of compose, aka it gets you the sigma combinator compared to S, which a lot of the times, you have an extra combinator, which actually for certain cases where the left tine is, or actually when the right tine is identity in a 3 fork or 3 train, so you lose 3 trains, you gain successive B combinators, aka 2 trains just in a row, and then you also have reverse compose.
Hold on. You're speaking about the AGH trains. The CAP does the thing about that KQ also do with anything, even time APL, that if you have a constant followed by a function, then that's considered as if that constant is bound as left argument to the function. And since CAP says that any sequence of functions is just a top of a top, then I believe that array function will be as if the array and the function are bound together as a monadic function that's applied atop of the rightmost function, effectively an AGH train, spelled identically, but syntactically actually works differently. Think about how it is in K, right? If you have an array function, or verb, and it will look like an AGH train, it works like an AGH train, it just isn't. But effectively, it's the same thing.
Well, and also, I mean, if you're separating the idea of the syntax from its actual implementation in CAP, these symbols for the train should actually be more versatile because you could make a language where actually either side could be a constant. So now that you've got a specific syntax for it, you could have an FGB train or whatever you want to call it, where the right side is an array, or you could have it be both sides are arrays, and then it just ignores your argument entirely and passes those arrays to the function.
Which is famously a problem you run into where you can only have that scalar array on the left, which means a lot of times you have to do this trick where you're commuting the binary operation in the middle just so that you can get the scalar on the left, which
Or you can make the constant function. Now we even have that in dialog as well. So now you can write the absolute value divided by 2, right? And then just put this tilde there assist on the right.
oh,
The 2 makes it into a constant function. It just works.
And in J, to do that, you just give it an infinite rank and make it a verb, and then it just works like a verb.
I have never understood the well, we're gonna have to save that. We got to talk about that more in a future episode. Is that I've never understood in J this what is it called, function rank? Like it's a concept that is not existing in the other array language.
With the rank infinity thing, that's just the rank operator. So that's not really related to function rank because you're not even passing it a function. So there's no function to have that.
You're just saying whatever I feed to you, you're going to feed back. And you can change the rank. You can go less than infinity rank, and then you'll get multiples of whatever you send in. So if you send a 3-item list in and make it rank 0, well, I guess rank -1 if it's items you're counting, you'll get 3 identical copies of the noun or the
Yeah, that actually works the same way in BQN, but by a more general mechanism. It's basically just that if you have an array instead of a function, it treats it as a constant function.
Just like in the APL, you have the add operator, does exactly this. Right? If you feed it a left operand that's an array, it just uses it as if it was a constant function.
All right, I apologize, folks. I failed as a podcast host. It's now been 10 minutes, twice the allotted time. So this was really more like Tacit episode 5.
We're all shocked.
I think it took 5 minutes to get the question out.
That's fine. Yeah, it did. I saw it took like 3.5 or 4 minutes, so I only gave Marshall, which was not fair. I think we did get an answer, though. We got an answer is that BQN, and I learned something. BQN is not aimed at being this idyllic, one array language to rule them all. It was aimed at being a very solid language that, improved on some mistakes, made some changes, but did not take risks on things of like, oh, let's play around with this idea and see how it turns out, because that's not what Marshall wanted to do. And the last thing that I'll mention is, so we're definitely going to talk about CAP more. We're going to talk about all this stuff more in future episode. And I'm traveling right now, but I'll be back in Toronto in November. So probably by mid-November, I'm going to do a live stream of exploring the Jelly language and creating something that I will be calling Jello, Hello Jello, which will be I don't want to call it a transpiler, but a tool for basically writing named strings or keywords that then does a conversion into Jelly, because my lord.
Could this possibly be Weewa inspired?
Not Weewa inspired, actually. I mean, the genesis of I'm already obsessed with combinators, but Weewa's removing ambivalence has really like piqued a new sort of curiosity on like what's possible in combinator land, because I just kind of figured that, and also it was a combination of the conversations I had at Minnowbrook. But anyways, to wrap this up, interested in exploring combinator stuff, and I took a look at Jelly because I had remembered Adam saying something about the every single composition of functions that have fixed arity forms a different pattern. And I was like, I tried to look into that, but it's just, the character set that they choose. I know this is, it's the pot calling the kettle black, because we're all our languages have symbols, but it is very, very difficult. And like, I don't actually know how to use the website correctly, because there's a little search bar that you can search the name of the glyph. And so I think like, I can't remember actually what range is, if it's capital R. I think R is for iota or range. And then capital J is for iota or range of the length of an array. But so you've got like a single letter, R and J. And I think most of the primitives that map from Ks and Js and APLs and stuff map to single letters. But then you've got all this sort of, what do you call the things that go on top of letters and whatnot?
Diacritics.
What are they called?
Diacritics.
Diacritics?
Diacritics.
All right, so they got all those things, but like, I'm not going to remember that stuff probably because I'm not going to spend a ton of time with Jelly. But what I want is just to be able to type iota, have a little program, convert that to the R. And then also, too, the one thing that I'm really curious is that in the docs, it talks about calling these chains by the arity of the symbols. So when you have a monadic fork, I don't actually know that this maps to in Jelly, but if a fork did map to Jelly, you would call that a 1-2-1 train because that's the arity of the functions. And if you had a dyadic fork, it would map...
Or 2-1-1 possibly.
2-1-1?
Because it's prefix ordering, right?
Oh, okay, yeah. Modulo, prefix, infix, all that stuff. But the idea, like the spelling in APL would be 1-2-1, and the dyadic fork would be 2-2-2. And I came up with this idea all on my own, which is what I was calling point-free lambdas, which we can talk about in another episode. Anyways, point is, that was a very long announcement to the fact that I will be exploring Jelly. I think I said on like 10 episodes ago I'd become an expert in Jelly at some point, and then the learning curve. It's just very hard to type, and I don't even know how to evaluate it. Like I think you have to hop between different tabs. Anyways, we'll let Adam have the final say, and then, dear listener, we will get to game programming in array languages.
Well, Jelly is actually of all the array languages, or somehow traced from APL, possibly with some exceptions of descendants of Jelly itself. Jelly is actually special in its choice of Unicode characters, in that I believe most any modern computer comes with the Jelly keyboard built in. Oh, you didn't expect that, huh? Don't need any special thing, any special setup, because there's actually something. You don't believe me?
Yeah, I don't know about that. I don't know how to. I mean, one, I didn't even know the name for a diacritic, and two, I definitely don't know how to type it. It's got to be some special key combination, which.
But actually, and it's very cleverly chosen. There's a scheme to that whole thing about dots below and above, and it's all inverses of something else as a dot, things like that. But there's actually something called the U.S. International Keyboard.
I feel like this counts. Just because it's got US in front of it doesn't make it not a special type of keyboard.
Okay, but the U.S. International Keyboard.
He didn't say it wasn't special. He said it came with your computer.
It comes with a computer. So that is a keyboard that is identical to the normal US keyboard, except the tilde, backtick, the hat, double quote, and single quote are dead keys. So if you push them, nothing happens until you push the next key, and then they create some kind of combination with that. Okay, so it's like the backtick keyboard that you know from RIDE and TriAPL and so on.
I mean, with this argument, isn't that like the same as saying like BQN comes with
Only on Linux?
No, because the US.
But like you generate those symbols that are not visible on your keyboard by going backtick, hitting a character, and then poof, a symbol that's not visible on your keyboard shows up. It sounds like you're making the same argument. It's just that
No, but the two points here.
But this is a standard keyboard.
Yeah,
setting.
this is a standard keyboard that ships with all modern operating systems that you can find on Wikipedia. It's not something special, and that's what I'm saying. I think any Linux and Windows and probably Mac as well, probably just a setting. You just switch to that keyboard because it's used
I
for.
see. You don't have to go to BQM.
Exactly. You don't have to use any kind of special software. It will just work everywhere, and the mappings actually make sense. Like if you.
The mappings, shots fired. How do you feel about this, Marshall?
I don't think that was the point.
If you hit the, I believe if you hit the quote key and then some character, then you'll get like something like a quote on top of a letter, and so on. If you hit like a double quote, and then
so it's a regular system where you get the same sort of diacritics on top of different letters by the key combinations.
Exactly. So the reason that those characters are chosen like that is so that they should be immediately typeable using this standard keyboard rather than forcing you to use some kind of special keyboard.
I had thought that the reason was actually it was just in the first 256 Unicode characters, so they fit in 1 byte for code golf purposes. Is that actually the case?
No, this is actually chosen so that Dennis, from the language, could just type it on his US International Keyboard.
Okay.
Well, we'll try and get Dennis on. I've heard he's sort of retired from, the public spotlight, but Stay tuned. Cap, Jelly, 25 minutes later, folks. And we will redeem ourselves because, as promised at the top of the episode, we are going to hopefully have David, Brian, and other folks to talk about this topic in more detail in future episodes. So I feel less bad about taking the first 25 minutes. I promise to try and do better next time. I do Tacit 6.1 after the actual Tacit episode. Back to, or I should say, our original topic was game programming in array languages. And I think I'll throw it to Marshall. And I'm not sure if we want to do like a round robin of what the state of the art in all the different array languages. I mean, I'm sure some have much less support than others, but definitely there has been, or at least I've seen a trend on YouTube of different folks showing, I think the coolest one is a 7-minute video of how to implement the Snake game in APL. And it's kind of sped up a bit, so it's definitely more than 7 minutes of coding, but the video is 7 minutes. So I don't know, Marshall, maybe you take it away.
Wasn't it BQN?
Did I say something
I
else?
said APL. Whatever.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it was BQN.
This is just a few weeks ago. David Zwitzer, I don't know if that's necessarily the correct pronunciation, but he's been working with BQN. He's been a BQN programmer for a while, but now what he's done, and I guess the development that leads to this is that Brian has been spending quite a while to bind a framework called Raylib to BQN. So the way that this works is that you have this this tool Raylib, which does graphics and everything, and I assume it's written in C or something. I've never actually checked, but it has an interface through C. And so BQN has our foreign function interface that calls native functions. And through that, Brian's written bindings that call all these Raylib functions, but not only like allow you to use them, but allow you to use them in a way that's kind of idiomatic in BQN that's much nicer. And so David's taken that and he said, well, I want to try out writing some video games. And I suspect he's not the only one to do so, but what he has done is put his whole process of making them into some videos. So there's two pretty long ones, which are kind of less edited. You'll see there are sections where he's debugging something and he just speeds through it. And then at the end of it says, okay, I figured it out. But I found them very watchable, actually. So he's got one, I think it's the first. Yeah, the first one is where he implements a lot of asteroids up to, it's not the full thing, but you have the ship and you can move it around and you can shoot the asteroids. And I think the shooting is not kind of fully implemented, but basically a pretty good portion of asteroids. You can get a clear idea of how you would finish the game from there. And then the second one, he implemented a full, enough to be playable version of Snake. So you can see how he builds up. And actually, it's pretty interesting, especially if you compare this to two Snake videos. So there's this long Snake video where he's just like he's working out a lot of things about how you would build a game in BQN. And he does it in a very object-oriented style, which is neat to me because one of the things that I found while I was developing BQN is that it does support this style. And I thought it was really cool that you can use, a paradigm that traditionally array programmers hate, but I've found a lot of uses for object-oriented stuff. But in my way of thinking, I guess he was at the beginning, using objects so much that it got in the way of the programming. But it helps make a framework for kind of organizing how you think about things. So you say, I've got this thing that I need to add to the game. What is it? Well, you don't really have to think about it because you say, all right, I'll start by making an object and then I'll make its methods. What do I need to do? And then once you've got this all together, what he did in this short Snake video that's only 7 minutes is he moved to a much more array style where there's not necessarily everything is an object, where there's more use of arrays. And there's some use of arrays in all the videos. Like he's using arrays for points and everything. There's clearly array programming going on. So the array side of BQN is helpful too. But in this short Snake video, he kind of condenses things. He uses objects much more carefully, I guess, for the things that are really more object-like. And so he's able to build this whole Snake game in like a page of code. So it's a really cool way to walk through and see, you could make a video game if you want, and here's how, and just get a really quick idea of, what are the patterns you need to use, what sort of methods are involved.
So I guess my first question is, because Raylib is the name of the backend library with the FFI C bindings. RAID-BQN, I believe, is the library that Brian's been working on, which I think even in that library, I'm not sure if David has contributed those examples, but I think there's 10 examples of games, and one of them is actually Snake, but that example of Snake is slightly different or drastically different because I think David's uses all 4 arrow keys, whereas the demo in the Raid BQN one uses only 2 arrow keys, because really you only need a turn left and turn right. And then the other 2 arrow keys, the up and downs, are for increasing the speed of the snake. So it's a different implementation of the game. And I played around with it and got that stuff up and working. It wasn't too much hassle getting that stuff up. You need to make sure you've got the dependencies for Raylib to work and whatnot, but the docs are good enough that it only took me like 20 or 30 minutes to get that up and running. So my question is though, is BQN the first language that has, I'm not going to be the best at describing how Raylib feels, but it kind of just feels like a game engine built on top of like a HTML canvas kind of thing. You've got the ability to draw, your objects and whatnot, and it's got I can't remember what the name of the function is that gets run that sort of updates the screen. But it's pretty simple, but like a lot of the times for these kinds of games, that's exactly what you want. And even sometimes it's more than what you want. Like if you're designing a board game, you don't even really need that, refresh. You sometimes just want to trigger that. But so my question is, does J or APL have kind of, maybe not the same thing of FFIs linking to some, game library, or do they have some other facility? Like my guess is that they're, like I've definitely seen Thomas Gustafson's, I think his name was. He has that demo, which is like a 3D, boat simulation. So clearly he's doing some massive graphic stuff. But if I recall, he is also hooking into some, I can't remember if it was some open insert letter library. But yeah, what is the state of the art in other array languages, or is BQN now, leading the charge on this front?
Well, yeah. So not to comment on the state of the art, but do other languages do this? Yes, definitely. I mean, there's a whole range of ways that you can do this. And so what I've worked with is J in the past. I know I've made some simple games in J, and a lot of what I used for this was actually their Windows base. I can't remember what it's called, but basically, there's a tool where you can, build up GUI stuff that's pretty linked to Windows, and was kind of later ported to use their, I think they're on Qt now.
JQT.
J's been through all sorts of different UI frameworks. So there's all sorts of different things. And also, if you want to do 3D stuff in J, I know when I was using it, the standard was OpenGL, which they had some reasonably nice bindings to. One of the things about this is that, everything, all the frameworks that people want to use, they're all constantly shifting underfoot. So like one thing is, it used to be that you could just be sure everyone was on Windows, and now there are quite a lot of Mac and Linux users, so you really want something cross-platform. And there are other considerations too. So if you really want to know the whole landscape, you have to keep yourself updated, and I'm not too updated on what different languages have done here.
And for J, the JQT is probably what you would develop in, and they've got actually a web window that you can develop in and just basically treat it like HTML. It can be a canvas, it can be SVG. You can do all those things in terms of your graphics. It does support OpenGL, so you can do that stuff as well. But I guess the example, when I think of games, it's interactivity, right? And I would say the areas that I've seen it used, not so much for games, but one is what was Michael Wallace's was Tangent Storm. We had him on a while ago. He's using it as a presentation method. And I think he's using immediate execution to be able to do that. But essentially, he can program and present at the same time and do things with it in terms of, it becomes an interactive presentation tool. And the other one I'm thinking of is what Ed Gottsman's put together for the Search and Wiki. It's very quick, it's very interactive, and it's a search. And he's created this he sort of modeled it after wanting to be as quick as Twitch, that kind of a very active way of searching things. And I think he's accomplished it. And that's the other way that I see people using interactivity. And he's using JQT. And I think he's using Isadraw, which is a command within JQT to be able to create things that you can see on the screen. But I think that just shows the possibility. I haven't seen anybody doing any extensive graphics or anything like that. Maybe, well, it's not really a game. Again, I wrote a program or an application called Jig, which allows you to look at a noun and blow it open. So if it's boxes, you can tell the levels of boxes, what type of a noun it is, just by looking at it, because it basically creates the noun, interrogates the information, and piles it out onto a SVG object so you can see what you're dealing with, which is kind of useful. But I wouldn't call it a game. It's just interactive.
Adam.
So in APL, I don't really know what is with other APLs than Dialog in this regard. Obviously, the Dialog has a solid, well-tested C interface, so it can call things like that, and it can communicate with other things like Python and .NET. But natively on the Windows, it has what's often referred to as QuadWC. It's not entirely good precise name for it, but basically it has a very nice tight integration with WinForms, which is a bit old technology by now, but it still works strong, and all the flagship applications are still using Win32 API for things. And there you can definitely have graphical games with interactivity, real-time stuff. In fact, if you have a normal install of Dialog, then there's a Spider Solitaire implemented like this. Looks a little bit rough. It could be polished up more. And we're working on improving the bitmaps there so that modern screen doesn't make pocket-sized, tiny stamp-sized playing cards. And then we have the HTML renderer, which again you could do anything there that you could do in a browser, but it doesn't have to have its own browser. It can run local desktop as well. And you have direct access to a method called execute JavaScript. You can send commands like that. You can get callbacks for things without having to go through a whole network thing. And then we have what at least used to be called MyServer, still kind of called MyServer, but folded into something called DUI, DUI, which is the kind of framework to deal with widgets and make some things easier when building HTML content and interactivity. And I've used that myself for several games and little applications, including interactivity. And some of them you can even play online in your browser. We'll have links to some of this. So for example, my children were small still, and they were just learning the alphabet. We speak Yiddish at home. They're learning the Yiddish alphabet. And I figured instead of me trying to repeat it and show them books and it's all boring, let me just write a little game to teach them this instead. So I did that. And so it has this game where it shows a keyboard, and you can take the mouse and click on keyboard buttons, and it says the sound of you can see the button going in, and says the name of the letter, and then it also gives you the children tasks. So it will say the name of the letter and then have the click on the right key on the screen. There's the 2048 game implemented like that. So there are definitely options.
Stephen, you were gonna add something.
Yeah, I love using fairly simple games for teaching. And if you go to code.kx.com/q/learn, you can find quite a number of them there. I'll come back to that topic in a moment, but I'd like to say I've got a history with games, which started quite early. My very first programming project, and I'm talking hundreds of years ago, when I was using a hand-operated card punch and ran programs in Fortran and Batch, was to do a very simple neural network. But the second one I wanted to do a space war game. And I was pleased to discover that the name of the program that I wanted, Space War, had a maximum of 8 characters. It took 8 characters, which was as long as I could give a program name in those days. I never really got Space War operating, though I took it with me to university and played with it there. But my mate Dave, this is when we were both about 16, 17 at school, was also working on a programming project in Fortran to play noughts and crosses. And he never got his program to stop cheating, but it did at one point shut down 2 nuclear reactors and evacuate an atomic energy research plant.
What?
Decided to play global thermonuclear war instead.
This was the plant no longer exists, but in Dorset there's a place at Winfrith Newburgh, the United Kingdom Atomic Energy Research Institute establishment. That was it. We had rights once a week. We could come in and run our programs, get a little stripy paper printout. And if you were real quick, most of the results we got were the compiler threw stuff out because of typos. But we'd moved on from the hand-operated card punches, and we had electric card punches there. And if you were real fast, you could correct your typos, push the deck back in, and have a second run before you went away and came back the next week. Anyway, Dave's program had been taking longer and longer to run, and when it was thrown out because it ran out of time, compiler error, he typed up a new job card and put it back into the deck. Our decks were those beige-colored IBM cards, but the job card was an orange one, and we'd been told to type on the job card simply T equals 3, J equals 3, which in those days meant that the program would get thrown out of the computer after an elapsed time of 3 minutes, and it had a priority of 3. Dave simply typed himself a new card, which is J equals 99, T equals 99, and put the duck back. What he didn't know was this is before Fortran 77. The guys down at Winfrith had hacked their own Fortran so that they got a primitive form of multitasking, because the main job of the computer was running the reactor experiments. Apparently, experimental nuclear reactors, you don't sit there with a bunch of controls, but you write a program for what's supposed to happen. And those programs had priority, and they were buffered always from hell. But the multitasking was inefficient, and there was plenty of space to run other programs while the reactor experiments were running. And that was the job queue that our stuff went into. Now, another feature of Eggtran was you could have variable arrays in it. Normally in Fortran, the standard Fortran in those days, at the beginning of the program, you declared what arrays you were going to use and how big they were going to be. And that was it, fixed. But in their version of Fortran, which they called Eggtran after Thomas Hardy's Egdon Heath, which was nearby, in Eggtran, you could declare arrays on the fly. And Dave had a subroutine which declared arrays on the fly. And what he didn't know was that he was stuck in an open loop and the parameters for the array size were growing. His program was like a tumor in the middle of memory. And eventually it ran up against the memory limits. There was no way that it would literally interfere with or taint the reactor programs, which were buffered always from hell. But computer internal security in those days was pretty simple. And basically, when it ran out of memory, it just rang the alarm bell and shut everything down. We knew nothing about this. We were hanging around in the punch card room waiting for the stripy paper to be ready so we could go back to school. And we heard in the distance something that sounded like sirens. You imagine something like a university campus. We're up on the second or third floor looking out of the window, and we see these huge plumes of steam emerging from the Dragon and Zebra reactor buildings. And after a few minutes, from the other buildings, people start emerging from the doors and walking briskly to the car park, taking their cars, and a line of cars forms and heads towards the gate. And we don't know anything about what's going on, but we think maybe we won't wait for the stripy paper, but we'll go down and go back to school, and we'll hear about all this next week. The following week, we returned. It had taken them, I think, 2 days to pick through the core dump from the computer. The mainframe had dumped itself over an emergency landline to the Atomic Weapons Research Institute at Harwell, where there was a reserve tape drive, which had spun into life, I suppose, alarming people God, we lost Winfrith. They picked their way through the core dump and figured out what was going on, and then half a day after that, they spent getting the reactors heated up again and resuming course. They were very nice about it. Were happy to let us continue working there. I guess they just really didn't want anybody hear very much about it.
I was gonna say that's like that story is amazing, but it reminds me on a different scale of I can't remember if they fired the intern, but there was an intern that managed to like spam everyone with a LinkedIn account or something, and then just with an email like with the title test. And I can't remember if that intern got in trouble or got fired or something, but I think the majority of the engineering community was like, I mean, that shouldn't be possible. An intern shouldn't have access to be able to like email every single user of the platform. And so that's what I was thinking is like, this is incredible. I mean, I can't imagine our listeners didn't thoroughly enjoy that story, but my thought in my head is like, how do these, kids essentially with punch cards have the ability to sure do something they're not supposed to do, but like, that's the thing. The intern wasn't supposed to send that email, but like, should they even be able to send that email? Like, how is it that you put a couple 99s and you basically you were able to like affect the nuclear like plant / simulation? Like, that just seems like wild that is even like, there's not, place guards in place to make sure that that's not like a low probability of happening, but like that just shouldn't happen. That's nuts.
That was 1968, and that's the reason why we have security now.
Was the honor system back then?
But they knew it was a problem for other programs to possibly interfere, but it's this side channel of your program could cause the machine to be shut down that you don't expect when you're on a multi-user kind of thing.
It sounds to me like the nuclear group had a fairly enlightened approach to it, letting you come back on, because essentially they're using you as beta testers for their system. And they want you to, if anybody's going to find cracks, it's going to be somebody who doesn't know what they're doing.
That's a very good point. That's a very good principle. I should remember that. So if you want someone who's going to find cracks, use someone who doesn't know what they're doing. I'm so often the person who doesn't know what he's doing. I'm coming back to teaching. I love using simple games for this because it so commonly follows this pattern that you can write the game engine. The game engine for 2048, once I spotted somebody last week playing it on the bus coming in from New Jersey, took about 3 or 4 lines of APL to write and then replicate in Q.
How long were your lines?
2048 is pretty simple. And then you can add a fairly simple a fairly simple terminal user interface. So you do the whole thing in character and you can sit there and play it and check out that it is as addictive as the one you have on your phone. And then you can add a GUI interface and use the IPC baked into Q to run a browser from it. And so with a fairly small amount of code, you can cover quite a lot and learn quite a lot. So I've been using 2048 in the last couple of weeks for my tutorials and teaching that. I'm very strong on using games for teaching.
I guess Wordle is the newer one now. It's probably even simpler.
But you need a dictionary.
Well, you just need a list of words, right? You have to check that all the users' inputs are words, don't they? You can either trust them or you can import a dictionary.
Yeah.
I was just surprised because once it was a Code Golf challenge to create a simple 2048 game that was playable. It's slightly simplified in that the new number that comes in is always 2 and never 4, which could happen in the real game. And I believe I won the Code Golf challenge at the time in APL with 151 bytes over 5 lines of code, but that's one line is very long.
It's 30 bytes per line, right? That doesn't seem that long.
No, that's 1 long line and 4 short lines.
Well, that's just presentation.
Well, that's something that actually I found very interesting. At one point when I just discovered Weewa, I was like, I got to make a decision. What language do I like better, BQN or Weewa? But I can't use these just simple, Code Golf, LeetCode. They're fun to do, but it's not actual. Well, I shouldn't say it's not actual programming. It uses a lot of skills that are useful in programming, but it's not an actual, application. And I was like, all right, I should just code a small game. And then I was like, I'll choose Mastermind because I've already used the exact matches in a couple talks I've given. But the near matches, which is the other problem, which I'm not going to explain, but it's just there's two different problems you have to solve, is a little bit more complicated. But then I ended up being like very unhappy, not because I didn't like the code, but because the game actually ends up being like just those two, like it's 2 lines of code. One is 3 characters for like BQN and Weewa, and the other one, sure, maybe it's like 10 or 15, but I was like, I implemented the whole logic in like less than 20 characters. And then the other, 10 lines of code is just, a little recursive function in order to be able to output. And then at first I was doing numbers, and like in order for like exact matches and near matches. So you'd get back 2 numbers that the sum of them was less than 4, less than or equal to 4. And I was like, wait a second, I have these 2 numbers. I can turn them into red and white circles if I put them in a string and just do replicate. And so like in another 2 lines of code or 2 characters or 3 characters, I then converted my numbers into actual Unicode. And I was just like, wow, like it's so easy to express the logic of these games that those aren't even like, and in the Python version of it, it's like, I can't remember, 20, 30 lines of code. Like I would consider that like a decently sized, program. It's not trivial. It's not one function. But because these array languages are so concise and so to the point, you almost need like an even more complicated, like what is a big enough problem in Python or Java or C++ to determine how you feel about it, just trivially. You're not writing some huge application. It's almost not enough for the array languages because you get your logic done in like 2 functions, 2 lines. And then you're like, okay, well, I didn't really code that much. I spent 30 minutes figuring out the UI stuff. And I'm not sure if that was the same thing that David found when he was doing the object-oriented versus like array versions of his Snake game. But anyways, just, something that I've encountered. That
Dialog APL ships with this Stephens workspace that contains a one-liner implementation of Mastermind Interactive. But again, in text form. Right? We started off with this and saying, like, how do you actually make a nice graphical-looking game? Doing a text-based one is often very simple, even in, say, C.
But this is a good time to bring up the the blog post that gave me the idea for doing an episode on video games is this game Draculark. And the idea there is not to make a more complicated game, but instead to do it on the Commodore Super Pet. This is not an old game. This, as far as I know, was made like this year, but there's a blog post that walks through it all, and it was done, in the way that you would make an APL game in the 80s or something. And so that seemed like a pretty neat idea too, that you could work with. And I think this was not even either. It wasn't a nested APL that they had access to, or they didn't use any array nesting. So it was an old school APL. And so it's interesting also to see what you can do with just a very restricted style of APL programming where, I said, oh, it's great to have the objects and everything. But what if really all you have is, one variable is one array and it contains numbers or characters? What can you do with that? And turns out there's a lot that's possible there as well.
So the Commodore PET is not dead, but only sleeping.
I suppose so. I don't...
The other game I can think of, and it's Dialog APL, is John Scholl's Game of Life, which is 1 line, right? So it's not really an interactive game.
Is that a game, though?
It's a 0-player game, is what Conway called it.
I believe I have somewhere also with that my server. Yeah. That I mentioned. I have an interactive version of it, meaning it can just play like normal, but you can also go in and click on the grid to add or delete a live cell. And then but that it's just taking the Game of Life as implemented in Stephens workspace and wrapping a little bit of graphics around that. But yeah, it's amazing what you can do. Small amount of code.
You mentioned too, Stephen, that at codekx.com, because I was not even sure that Q would be usable for. But I guess you're saying so. You're saying that you've done 2048 on the terminal. Does Q?
These are all text, right? The ones that are...
Yeah. Does Q have support for any graphical stuff? I was thinking it wouldn't because it's such a financial... Or not, I shouldn't say financial. It's such a perf centric language that I would imagine that there hasn't been too much investment in like a GUI or that kind of thing. But I could be wrong.
Well, the GUI is not native to the language, and you're right about that. But it's a general purpose programming language, and you've got IPC baked into it, so it's trivial to run a web server from your app and just deliver HTML.
Right, similar to what a couple of the other Adam mentioned that as an option.
I haven't tried it, but if I wanted to do like game type programming in K, the first thing that I might go for is John Ernest's Special K.
Yeah, I was going to say we should mention that.
Because, that's very media oriented. And I'm sure it has some interactivity.
He has a snake game as well in that.
But again, it's really nice. It's really nice for the teaching of this stuff, because the game is such a small domain. You don't need to know finance or engineering or anything like that. And as Adam keeps pointing out, the core of the logic is just a few lines. So you get to build something that's small but non-trivial and important architectural layers. You've got the functional core of the logic. You've got some kind of looping structure for playing the game, and then you can put on top of that the GUI user phase or the IPC for a multiplayer game. And you're really you're not spending a lot of time having to generate a lot of code. You're kind of getting there and learning principles. So for study and teaching, this is brilliant. Yeah,
I agree. It's a lot of people get into software development and programming because of their fondness for gaming, right? And it is a very, very rewarding way to program, whether it's gaming or just any kind of instant feedback. Like, I just think the REPL is like another example of why it's like you get to instantly see the results, and why I love like BQMPad, because like you're not even getting new lines. You're just getting live feedback, like updates of your result, is like when you're game programming, and the first thing you do is you whip up a little panel, and then if it's when I was programming the Scrabble game, then you have your 15 by 15 grid, and just even seeing the 15 by 15 grid is like, oh my god, that's so cool. And then you have to, some of the tiles have different colors for triple word, double word, and then it's a very simple thing to like go get the RGB codes for the colors you need. And like I even found like an old school, I think it's the 1969 deluxe version, which has this very like, there's a bunch of different Scrabble themes, but like that color theme is my favorite because it's the one I used as a kid. And I went and like, did a color picker to get the exact, colors of that, got the RGB codes from some website. And then you create literally like a 15 by 15 grid, or you can create like a hash map and store the indices. But like it only takes 10 to 15 minutes to get the info you need to get that to update, and then you go from a blank canvas to a 15 by 15 grid to a 15 by 15 grid with the colors, and you're just like, holy smokes, I'm actually doing something. Versus if you're doing some non-graphical thing, you get to see the result, but I think it's less exciting and less rewarding than seeing some kind of GUI being updated as you program.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, both with the GUI and non-GUI, that's something I really like about this I mentioned before, QuadWC in Dialog, that it's all object oriented, and I can, as soon as I change a value somewhere, things are changing on the screen in front of me. I can hand type things to change things. I can run a little loop that changes things, so things will move smoothly around. But actually, maybe I think the most fun thing I have in Dialog is if we have this integrated IDE, and you can open character variables, so like a character matrix or vector of character vectors. And if you have such an editor window open as part of the IDE, and you change the value of that array from outside the editor, of course you can change it in the editor as well. But if you change it from outside the editor, then the editor is instantly updated, which means you can, with no code, get real-time updates on some code that changes things, and you can easily make like a game of life. Of course, it doesn't do interactivity, other than you could potentially go and change what's in the editor, but you can make a game of life that runs in the editor itself, and various kind of illustrations and things. Of course, it doesn't do color. Of course, it doesn't. There's a lot of limitations, but it's not just low code. It's literally no code. Just change your variable.
I wonder. I'm not sure, Marshall, if you know the answer to this, but because I didn't watch the longer version, or assuming that there was a longer version of the Snake game, I only watched the short one. But a lot of the times, it looked like he was switching desktops to one that had the Snake game, and then one that he was developing in, and it looked like when he did the switch, like he wasn't recompiling or relaunching the window, and so he was, he'd add a box and it would just instantly show up. Whereas when I was trying to build up a small game using the RAID BQN, each time I made some change, I would have to go and like relaunch the window. Was that just a magic of video editing, or was he actually making live changes?
I think he probably had some sort of editor set up for that. It would be my guess. We'll have to ask him because it's not clear in the video.
Yeah, that is really cool. And that is the Clojure is the example that I can think of, that when you're developing in Clojure scripts for websites, they typically use a tool called Shadow CLJS. And you can like pipe in, there's a compile command, but there's also a watch command. So like developing when you have a watch command is so cool, because then you keep the, the game or the web page on one page, and then you make changes. And as you save, it just like automatically updates what you're working on. And if you have an error in your code, it'll just show a 404 or something will go haywire, but then you can just go Control Z and fix it. And like, that is the epitome of real-time feedback. I mean, it's similar to BQN pad, right? You're just typing, and I mean, you have to hit save, and BQN just waits for 400 milliseconds or whatever it is.
Well, there you don't have to press enter. So what I do is, since I would be doing a key command to save anyway, I just do a different key command to save and also update the thing that I'm working on if I want to do something interactively. So that depends on being able to, I usually do this in Vim, but whatever editor, if you can script it, you can do something like that.
Stephen?
Yeah, I want to point out, if you do as Adam says, you get a game engine going in a few lines of code, and you do that in functional form, so that you're basically got two arguments, state and a move, producing a new state, then you've got something that you can use to search a tree of possible of move possibilities. And the code for doing that is very small. Now you move from a game engine that will just do the move state into something that starts to be smart, looking for better solutions.
Yeah. It's very, very cool.
That's good programming technique, coding technique to do that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure most JavaScript, I don't know if you call them frameworks or whatever, they have this kind of live updating. And I think that was, back in the day, Erlang, I think, was one of the first. They called it hot reloading. It wasn't necessarily for graphics, but you could make live edits to your code without taking the system down. And there are certain frameworks and languages where like that's not possible. And it's like especially if you're like designing something graphical, like it's very irritating if every single time you make a change, you've got to go run a couple commands and then launch something. And yeah, super nice to have that hot reloading and live edits being reflected in what you're working on. So I was going to say earlier, I'm not sure if this sets the record in that little bit where we did our round robin of, APLJ, KQ, BQN. I think we got more links in like a 6-minute period than we have on any other episode. So we will be sure to add all the links for all the languages if you want to go check out this stuff to maybe start playing around with whatever your favorite array language is and doing some GUI game programming. I hope, if I can figure out how to get RAID BQN working correctly, because I ran into a few issues on Linux, and I posted some issues, and I know that Brian, I think, is working on fixing them and may actually already have fixed them. I just haven't revisited to check. I hope to either make some YouTube videos or live stream converting my Python Scrabble game, or at least a subset of it, because the Python version has a ton of extra stuff that is really unnecessary for like a minimal Scrabble game. But I think that's super interesting because in order for it to be efficient, you need to have a kind of try or dog data structure. Dog as in DAWG, which is a directed acyclic word graph. I don't think actually my implementation uses the full dog. It just uses a prefix tree, which is good enough. But like the point is those are node-based containers, which will be interesting to see how well that fits into the array model /BQN, or if there's some alternative array solution that's just as efficient that I just don't have my brain wrapped around yet. But anyway, stay tuned. I'm not sure. Are there any other final thoughts that we want to say other than sending folks to all the links that will be in the show notes, Adam?
One more link. Yeah, I think we can't stop this without mentioning, and the same thing, boasting a little bit. The oldest game implemented in APL that I've gotten my hands on. So Marshall reminded me that I'd done this work. So there's this old code for and code collections for the APL 360, these old tapes, and I managed to extract from the contents of those a game called Kingdom that was written in 1974, and which it's really a port from another game called Hammurabi or Sumer. And it's not really very interesting, the game. And it's like you have this kingdom and you have to decide what you're going to do every season, if you're going to hire more soldiers, if you're going to how much grain you're going to use and so on. But the curious thing is that this was written for APL 360 in 1974, and there are all these cool new array languages coming up, but APL is very proud of being backwards compatible. So I looked at how little do I need to change to make this run on state-of-the-art APL interpreter today. Turned out there were 3 things I needed to change. Being the lack of nested arrays, there was this shortcut syntax for printing numbers and text next to each other with a semicolon in between them. That's not supported anymore. So you had to like format the numbers and concatenate with the text. And then there are these I-beams for system things. Those are specific to the 360 system, had to be replaced with some system variables today. But there were 2 of those. So 3 things I had to change, and then it just runs on a modern day system, and it's very playable, possibly slightly addictive too.
All right. Well, we will throw a link for that in the show notes as well. And if you are listening to this and you have your own personal game project, feel free to email us, and we could potentially announce that on a future episode just as an announcement. Maybe we should put together a repo where people can, like, they have all these different amazing C++ libraries, and, we could have amazing array language games, and we could just link them so people can have a place to go and check out what's possible. And the email that you can email us at is...
The email you can email us at is contact@arraycast.com. And on a future episode, we will have David Switzer, and I've found Brian's name.
Oh, here we go.
It's Brian Ellingsgaard, and I hope I'm pronouncing that close to right, but Brian Ellingsgaard. And we will have them on future episodes because these guys are actually doing games. And I think rather than us talking about how games might be done in our systems, well, their feedback would be really useful about how they're actually implementing this stuff. And I think that's about it. Oh, and remember...
It's Ellingsgaard.
It's Ellingsgaard?
Yeah, because double A in old Danish spelling. He's from the Faroe Islands. His name is Danish.
Okay.
So, Brian Ellingsgaard.
Ellingsgaard. Scold or Skull?
Oh, like from Marvel, they say guard, Asgard, this kind of thing. It's missing the little ring on top of the A to make it a yard goal.
Asgard. Oh, wait, what's the correct pronunciation of Asgard? It's not Asgard?
Asgard.
Asgard? Oh, I like Asgard better because I've heard Thor say it so much.
Thor, not Thor. Anyway.
Thor? Oh, man, Marvel just completely...
What do you think those Americans know?
Well, Thor pronounces it Asgard, and Thor pronounces it Asgard.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
I don't know if it's just like the audible bias of hearing it so much, but Asgard and Thor definitely sound better to my ears.
Thor sounds a lot more thundery to me, I have to say.
Oh, that's true. Maybe they pronounce thunder.
Yeah, exactly. Thunder in Danish is called Torden, so it fits with Thor makes Torden in Asgard. It's not Thor makes thunder in Asgard. Mangling the Scandinavians. But coming back to those diacritics, guess those Americans just don't know how to type a little ring.
I think there's 3 words you need to say, Connor.
All right, with that, we will say happy array programming.
Happy array
programming.
And sorry about the mispronunciation, Brian.